you're a coach or a consultant, sports psychology consultant like myself, the number one thing that every client asks for is how to improve their performance because of increases in stress during certain situations. Situational anxiety is the number one thing. And so in order to combat anxiety, I have, the field of sport and exercise psychology was created. However, over the last, say 10 years or so, new techniques have come out that have sprung from, I think it'd be safe to say, Eastern philosophy, in that what we're seeing now are groups of athletes in large numbers doing things and exhibiting behaviors in their field that it almost looks like they're in sort of a trance. This goes beyond the so-called zone, and it is in a field that is described as mindfulness. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about how you can use mindfulness to help your athlete overcome situational anxiety. Mindfulness has been around for a long time. It just wasn't named mindfulness, let's say 20 years ago. But people in certain cultures and certain orientations have been using the tenets of mindfulness for many, many, many years. And so now what we're seeing is the precepts, if you would, move into the athletic realm to help athletes overcome anxiety, and more specifically, situational anxiety. Mindfulness is just really a frame of mind, but even more specific, mindfulness is perception at work. So let me give you an example of that. An athlete feels like that the Olympics is something, they live and die for this goal. In other words, it means everything to them. This particular event that's happening in the future, they are literally, or they feel like they're literally living for this. Nothing else matters. It's all eggs are in one basket. Their total commitment, they've bought into that mantra. It's an all or nothing thing. I'm gonna do it or die, so forth and so on. Well, they've given themselves no room now. Nothing. There's no room here for an escape plan. Nothing. So then really what they're doing is they're holding themselves hostage. The goal, the lifestyle, the perception of life is holding the athlete hostage. Now, you can say, well, that's what it takes to separate the wheat from the shaft, is this kind of intense pressure to move away the people that are not as committed. But I would argue that if we're talking about commitment here, then you can have an athlete that is just as committed to success without having all of the window dressing of being some ostrich with your head in the sand and 12 hours a day training. This is just a fallacy now in the modern athlete, is that you have to hit, as far as golf is concerned, you have to hit 200-300 balls a day, and you've got to do all of these things that were prescribed back 40 years ago. And it's just not true. Because if you're a person that hits 200 or 300 balls a day, then you're going to wear yourself out. Body not going to be able to handle all that stress and that pressure. So then the old school athlete will say, well, you know what? Then I'll just take on the surgery after that. Okay. If that's what they feel like they have to do mentally in order to prove that they're committed, then that's fine. But there are plenty of athletes out there that are taking it smarter, taking a more healthy approach to their athletic performance and saying, look, once I reach a certain threshold of repetition, then that's it. And then I just simply apply what I've learned in this environment into the next environment. And you know what? I'm not going to attach any more significance into that environment than I am going to do in this environment. That's mindfulness right there. And so the academic, if you would, definition of environment is approaching an athletic situation non-judgmentally, adding no significance to it at all. And this goes and runs against the grain, you see, of what they have been taught in the past, whereas the Masters is the thing that they want to win the most. The Super Bowl is the thing that they want to win the most, World Series. But you have athletes that work up to that point and then completely fall apart at that point. Why? It's because they have framed this event to be more important than the events that came prior. And so then therefore, we get into this whole thing about, well, now because I want this very badly, not so much important, I'm gonna try real hard now. And so there is an old adage, and of course I hate adages, but there is an adage in the game of golf that the harder you try, the worse that you do. It's that way in every sport. And so why is that? It's simply because, most sports that I am aware of, it requires a person to be relaxed. So that allows free range of motion in their movement. So if your body is flooded with the chemicals that are released due to trying harder and you've engaged the fight, flight, or freeze mechanism, then that restricts movement. And so restricting movement then is a great way to fail at sports, but you're trying harder. That is the quandary. That is the thing that confuses a lot of athletes. I'm doing all I can do. I'm doing even more, and yet I'm not having any success. I deserve success because of all I am doing. This is the irony, if you would, of high-end athletics, and that is one of the reasons why mindfulness can be such a great thing in the athlete, like I just described, because then they stop putting significance on the amounts of practice, and they start putting, let's say, significance on the quality of their practice. They've not judged it. I should be doing better because of, and you can fill in the blanks, you see. And this has to deal with expectations as well. In mindfulness, there is no expectations. In fact, there's nothing. All there is just execution. There have been some people now, some PhDs and people like me, have now started 10-day classes, I think. You fly out and pay several $100s to be part of a group that goes through mindfulness as a discipline that now you can have a better understanding in when you're applying it to your clients or maybe into the classroom, I'm not sure. And so these people are apparently some of the ones that have created these programs for practitioners to go and learn step-by-step processes on how to implement mindfulness either in their practice or in their client's practice or perhaps even in themselves. MBSR is one of them. Mindfulness-based stress reduction is one of the programs that I just mentioned. MSPE is another one, Mindfulness Sport Performance Enhancement. Another program. I assume that they're all about the same. I have had no experience with them, but just for the purposes of this module, I want you to be aware of them so that maybe you, if you want to take it to the next step, that you can. The one that I did a little bit of research on was a thing called MAC, Mindfulness Acceptance Commitment. And the reason I know a little bit about that is I wrote a paper on this subject using MAC. And so really what it is a technique that if an athlete can adopt, and I say if simply because when you're dealing with a high-end athlete, typically you're dealing with an A personality, a real hard-charging go-getter. Now what we're doing is asking them to forget about all of that. What we're asking them to do is just simply look at practice as a mechanism to increase their performance simply because of the science behind it. Science meaning that if they can better acclimate into this particular move that then has given them more success in practice, then they have accomplished what they're trying to do. So again, we go back into the game of golf. So a player is hitting a bucket of balls, 50 or 75 balls. The first 25 are hit within a 10 or 15 feet circle, every one of them, 100%. I would then argue with that player, then what else do you need to do? What else is it that you need to learn? You have hit this particular shot, A to B, in such a way that you appear to have it mastered. Now, that doesn't mean that when you get on the golf course, because you're going to be able to do it, simply because the environment has changed. But there's the argument, you see, and that's what mindfulness is that you've done it on the range. Your body knows how to execute it in this environment. Out in that environment, what's the difference? It is the environment. You are on the course. But I would then again counter that and say there is no difference. If it's the same kind of physical environment, meaning the ball is sitting in a similar or the same kind of lie angle, and you can't pull it off, then you've allowed a variable to come in to judge. You're judging it now. In other words, you're saying, well, this is a little tougher lie here. The pin is a little tucked. The pin is in a different position. No, you're judging it now. The pin is tucked, going to be a little tougher lie. Tougher, harder, faster, easier, longer, shorter. All of those words are judgment words. The athlete is judging it now. Then the judgment can either reduce focus. This is an easy hole, and I don't really have to focus that much. Judged it. I don't have to really try that hard because this is an easy hole. Or man, this is a tough, long hole. I've really got to step up on this driver. They judged it, and then therefore, because it's such a long hole, then they got to hit the ball harder. Okay, well, so because I'm hitting the ball harder, then that denotes I'm trying harder. And again, here we go back down the rabbit hole, trying harder, you know what happens. So then I would try to frame it in that athlete's mind. Look, just hit it the way you did on the range. The environment is the same. Situation is the same. There is no difference here. The pin is the pin. The ball does not know what the sand looks like. Ball could care less what the water looks like. The ball is just a variable here, and the environment that you're hitting is exactly the same as it was on the range. Now, there may be some decisions that have to be made due to risk aversion, right? And that's fine. But even that is a judgment. But we're talking about at the highest of highest levels now. When an athlete can do something on the range and they choose not to do it in the field due to risk aversion, then we're talking about an athlete that is using percentages, course management, if you would, to navigate an entire round of golf or an entire, say, game. They're using percentages then to better their chances of success over a long period of time. 4 rounds of golf, 6 innings of pitching, that sort of thing. And so that is smart. But again, if you can get an athlete into that space, then what you're talking about now is a super elite person that is not, they are not negatively affected by stress or pressure, and yet due to risk aversion and percentages of risk aversion, they choose not to replicate success that they've had in a practice session because of percentages. Now, what you're talking about now is the highest of highest echelon in thinking as far as performance enhancement is concerned. Like many of the modules that we've been talking about, the first step into mindfulness or helping your athlete move into mindfulness is simply their awareness. If you can get them to become aware of how they are feeling physically, how are they feeling? Are they feeling tense? Are they feeling tight? How is their heart rate? Are they feeling their hands are continue to dry? What's happening? Breathing rate? Are they aware of these things? And that'd be the first thing. And then once if those things start to happen in a competition, then they analyze, why did it happen? In their opinion, why did it happen? Was it due to their lack of eye control? Was it due to their monitoring or not monitoring, if you would, of how they're communicating with themselves? Are those things the variables that are triggering these somatic events? And if it is, then that'll be the first step. As we continue down deeper down the mindful rabbit hole, the next thing is going to be their perception, perspective, if you would. If you can get them to a place where one event is not as important to another event, then that could help them in the event that the press, the world, the public, or whatever thinks is so important. So an athlete says, well, I want to do well at Tucson, and if I do well, fine. But what I really want to do is I really want to make it to the U.S. Open. If I could just win that Open, so forth and so on. That kind of language. Because one event is more important. That's the perception. Well, why would that be? Why would one event be more important? Because of accolades that could be layered upon this other event. And again, what we're talking about here is judgments. Well, you win the U.S. Open, you get your name on a trophy forever. Okay, fine. Can you tell me who won the U.S. Open in 1996? No. And so you said, well, that would be my name in history. So what the athlete is saying is that they really want to be known. It's their legacy that they're trying to build. And by winning these tournaments, that's going to sort of cement their legacy. So that athlete now is in their mind. They're really, it's important for them to have the public look upon them as in history. The golfing public, the football public, it's important to them that they be looked upon as there's the U.S. Open champion. So then, as you can sort of, I think as I'm saying that, you can sort of frame it in your mind, what is really motivating this athlete? You see, extrinsic motivation. They're not doing it, more than likely, they're not doing it for the mastery, feeling good about themselves, even though that could be part of it. But if they're in that mode, I want to go down as X, Y, remember for this, then that's their motivation right there. Are they doing it for the love of the sport? Maybe, but they want to be looked upon as being great. What does that say about that person? What is it that they're saying? So we got some ego involved here. And you know what? If it is, it is. And you have to, as a consultant, coach, or if that's what you're thinking about as an athlete, that's one of the things that you need to be aware of. And hopefully you can let that go. Why is that? Because those are the kinds of thoughts that can lead the athlete into failure. I want this so badly that I'm going to hit balls and I'm going to practice. And well, you should be doing that anyway. If you're committed on your sport, that's something that should be on automatic pilot, because you've been given a great gift. You want to squander that gift, have an opportunity to give back to the public, let the public enjoy what God has given you, if you believe that. And there you go. Inspiration to the public. Inspiration to people that, quite frankly, they don't have the gift that athlete does. And so, but instead, they may be thinking about, if I can win the Masters, then I get to come to the dinner and, I get to come back as long as they play that, so forth and so on. That tells you where they are as far as their motivation is concerned. And then maybe once you point that out, you might have an impact on the way they believe, their belief system, value system, if you would. Again, we're at the core of the individual now. And then if you can do that, then perhaps they start reframing it in their mind, and then all of a sudden, down the road, they don't look at the Masters or the U.S. Open or the Super Bowl or anything else with such high regard. They look at it just like at another event. But it's not enough just to tell them that. This is something on the base, the deep level, the core of the individual. And if they're going to change, it's going to take time. It's going to happen overnight. Mindfulness, though, is a tool that you can introduce to your client and to your athlete that can help them get from that one place to the next place of just pure execution, and hopefully with joy in their heart. Many, many years ago, I had one of my first golf instructors used to have a phrase saying that it don't matter. And of course that went right over my head. I was a young man and knew everything at the time. I didn't understand really what he was talking about. And so what I finally come to realize is this was a part of mindfulness. It's part of perspective. And it doesn't matter, though, is a thing that I've used with my clients to try to get them into a place that in golf, let's say, that this particular shot, if you hit it wrong or in the wrong place, it doesn't matter. Just do your best. Do your best. Do your routine. Get yourself set up, proper alignment, so forth and so on. And then commit onto the shot. Do the best that you can. But the words "it don't matter" encompass an entire philosophy. And what hopefully I get them into a place, into their mind, I try to lead them into this place, or get them to move themselves into this place, even better, is that this whole thing doesn't matter. What matters is that you're a good person. And so that's really the it's outside of the realm of golf, but the idea was we have a very anxious athlete trying very hard and not getting back what they think they deserve in this game. And so it don't matter then gives them permission to sort of ease up on themselves and just do your best. And so, in other words, if they don't do well in a tournament, you know what, it doesn't really matter. That no one cares that much anyway, other than your folks and yourself and so forth. And no one's going to remember this, either good nor bad. No one cares. They care about themselves and what their kid is doing, or of their person that they're interested in. And so, but many times a young player will think that everybody is watching them and they don't want to be embarrassed, and they're being judged and so forth and so on. And so the "it don't matter" is a perspective that I try to get them out of, thinking that everybody is watching them. They're being judged. Well, that gets in the way, obviously, of the execution. I don't want to miss this shot. They're motivated to avoid failure because they're trying not to be embarrassed. So the "it don't matter" gives them cognitive permission then just to swing away. And then you know what? If it goes in the water, it goes in the water. And so then, because it doesn't really matter, I've done my best, I figured it out, I knew why I hit it in the water, I take a drop, I move on. That's a real short memory, and boy, that's a rare thing to have. Part of that, though, is mindfulness. So this is a longer road from a typical type A personality into mindfulness. And so it don't matter can be sort of like a mantra in their mind, gosh, I wish I hadn't hit that in the water. Well, you know what, it doesn't really matter. I can make it up. And if you look back many, many years ago, that's exactly what Tiger did. I think he shot, 40 on his first 9 at the Masters, but it didn't matter. Came back and won the tournament anyway. He knew he had time. He had time to figure these swing things out, and he went forward. But look at that athlete's environment and how he grew up. Examine it, if you would. His mother and his father. Think about it. So if you're coming up against an athlete, 16, 18, 20 years old, they probably wasn't raised in that type of environment. You're coming at them brand new. So mindfulness would be a thing that you may introduce at the end of your consult, just as a seed in their mind to say, look, we've worked all the way through your anxiety. We got that under control. We've introduced some mental skills training. Now let me introduce something to you that you can think about using for the rest of your career. Mindfulness it's a lifestyle, and it's not something that you want to introduce like right away. It's something that you would introduce as it got more acclimated to mental skills training. I want to make clear, though, "it don't matter" is a philosophy, but it is a lot different than "I don't care." And so "I don't care" means that would be a thing where they got to a point beyond "it doesn't matter." "I don't care" means I really don't care if I score well or not, because it has there's no consequences here. So you don't want to cross that line stating that I don't care what other people think. That's fine. That would be a good place to have. But I want to make sure you understand that it don't matter does not mean I don't care. So there is that fine line, and that's something that you want to be aware of with your athlete if you decide to use mindfulness and it don't matter into your consult. 3 things that I have done to help my sort of anxious clients move towards mindfulness. I have introduced a thing called the 10-second rule on them. And so what that means is then it would be foolish you have an athlete that's upset, crying or yelling, or they're really berating themselves after a bad shot or a strikeout or something like that. To tell them just to shut it all down, it doesn't matter, at the very beginning of your consult, it wouldn't work, because mindfulness is a thing that would take quite a bit of time to implement. So if though you can get them past the initial perspective training and then a little bit more into the mental skills training, then you can introduce mindfulness as further down their cognitive rabbit hole. The 10-second rule then gives them permission to be upset after disappointment, bad shot, bad pitch, strikeout. They get disappointed, gosh, or whatever they do. They got 10 seconds to get it off their chest, figure out what happened, and then move on. And what this is going to help them do is take the initial steps into mindfulness, so that the 10 seconds hopefully will be reduced to 5 seconds. They simply figure out what happened, what didn't I do, and what do I need to do in the future to become successful in this same situation or same environment, and then move forward without all the emotions, way high, way low, way high, way low. We just want them right here, regulated. That's what we want. Of course, again, when you're dealing with a teenager who is unregulated, simply because they are physically growing, literally, in their brain, and the part of their brain that controls emotion it's still developing. It's going to be a challenge. However, if you can start them early on it, then they can take it with them as they get older. But the 10-second rule is a control mechanism. I got 10 seconds to get it out of my system, and then I can move forward. And so what you're trying to do is get them to have what's called a short memory, and they're not dragging their failures with them every time they go up to bat or a golf shot. We want them to be able to recall the positive stuff. The negative stuff is a learning experience. I've learned from it. I've yelled and screamed, and now I've figured out what I need to do differently next time, and then here we go. So that is the first step that I do to help my clients move forward in moving towards mindfulness. If you've got a client that has these outbursts, 10 seconds, you got to make sure that they're breathing. Make sure that they're breathing, because when a person has these outbursts, many times it can be followed up with a somatic reaction. Chemicals released, adrenaline, cortisol, epinephrine released into the body, perhaps making them tight. So breathing can help reduce the length of time that the chemicals are in their body, and it also helps keep the blood flowing in the hands and in your head and in the head. And so I know it sounds fundamental, and it is, but breathing is a thing that must be adhered to when you're dealing with mindfulness. Breathing. And finally is monitoring their self-talk. Why would an athlete, after not performing a particular move and they get disappointed, why would they have an outburst? Because they're disappointed. Well, disappointment is an emotion. And so if a person gets disappointed, many times, if they're not regulated, they'll have an outburst. Maybe they'll slam a club in the ground, maybe they start to cry, maybe something. But something has happened as far as the self-talk in their mind to trigger disappointment is something they don't want. Painful is what it is. And then because they're so disappointed, then they have an emotional outburst right there, whether it be the yelling, the crying, or whatever. But it all is the way that the event is framed in their mind. In other words, it's the self-talk that has programmed the outburst. So then an event happens. and the athlete perceives it as a failure, a strikeout, an out of bounds ball, they get upset. If you're with them, you can simply ask them, what exactly were you thinking at that particular moment? What were you thinking? They may say, well, I wasn't thinking about anything. I was just reacting. Well, the reaction has already been programmed, or they wouldn't have reacted the way they did. So then you can then introduce regulatory self-talk, or you can introduce reciprocal self-talk, meaning that instead of being upset, they can introduce self-talk that says, well, that's interesting. That was interesting. Well, what does that mean? That's interesting. Well, that's a very just a neutral statement. Well, that was interesting. Let me figure that out. That in itself is the beginning of reprogramming the mind, specifically the subconscious mind, which has been programmed to react this way when this happens. So to override that, then you could make sure that they are aware of how they are communicating with themselves now and in the past. If they say, well, I wasn't thinking anything, then you introduce language to them that disrupts the negative reaction. So they have a strikeout, they had a ball out of bounds, they get weepy, or they get upset. You can interject it right on the spot if you're with them, let's say, or you can suggest things that they can do so that when it happens to them and they're alone or in a tournament or whatever, a ball goes out of bounds and they start to feel it, and then they say, no, that was interesting. All right, let me work on this. Let me see, what did I do, so forth and so on. In other words, you're giving them a mechanism of control. Now that's a big deal. When an athlete is in control, then they feel empowered. If they are empowered, then they're more than likely able to produce a desired outcome. They are in control. Instead of being, upset, they're not in control at all. And that's when they start losing their confidence. They've lost it. And you've heard that adage before, I just lost it. It's no way to go through athletics, and plus it takes the fun out of the game. So again, the 10-second rule, breathing, and then finally monitoring the self-talk. 3 terrific and proven ways to help an athlete move down into mindfulness with emotional regulation. At this time, I want to give you a couple of examples of how mindfulness, real-world examples of how mindfulness could have helped some athletes in the past. I'm not going to name these athletes, but I think you're going to recognize them. More than likely, you'll recognize who they are when you hear this example, and how, if you had been working with that client, what could you have done to help that client as far as using mindfulness to help this athlete overcome what is called self-sabotaging behavior. Self-sabotage is behavior that some athletes will engage in when they're trying to get themselves out of situations, or is based on fear. They don't want to face things that they think is going to happen in the future, and then therefore they go ahead and sabotage their success now, give them an excuse in the future so that they can blame the behavior on their failure. And so that is certainly not a person that's mindful, that's for sure. So let's just say that you're working with this athlete, you see the behavior that they're using. Perhaps you can use one of mindfulness techniques in order to make that athlete more aware. So with that, let me go into example number 1. Many decades ago, there was a ball player that was so naturally gifted. I mean, people heralded his success from one side of the country to the next. He was so naturally gifted with hand-to-eye coordination that even today, when you mention his name, people try to compare and contrast his record with players that are playing Major League Baseball today. One of the interesting variables in this athlete's life was that all of the males that were very close to him, they died before they were 40 years old of a disease that was inherited. And therefore, this athlete, thinking that he was going to die before he was 40, went out notoriously partying, sleeping around on his wife. He had a wife and 2 children, but it didn't matter. Had a lot of affairs, drinking like a fish, not taking care of himself. And yet, even with all of that, and because of his age, he was able to perform at unbelievable levels at that point of his life. And then it started to catch up with him. The disease that killed his father, brother, uncle passed over him. And so he lived longer, and yet he lived with regret after his days of playing ball were over. So what could you have done as a consultant, or hopefully as a coach to this athlete, if you had known about mindfulness and thinking and knowing about what this athlete was going on in his mind? You have those 2 now. You know about mindfulness. You've been working on the team as the athletic counselor or sports psychology consultant. What could you have done in order to help this athlete? Could have been a better ball player. He's world famous now, certainly in the United States. Baseball Hall of Fame, number retired, the whole thing. What could you have done using mindfulness to help this athlete be an even better ball player? Well, obviously, with that kind of stress on the athlete's mind, he's thinking about something that's happening in the future, something that he thinks is going to happen to him in the future. He's going to die before he's 40, so I'm going to party like crazy right now. I get that, right? I get that fatalistic kind of a point of view. I'm going to have all the fun I can right now. So this athlete equated fun with party with fun, all right? Is there other ways that he could have had fun without destroying his body? That'd be the first thing. These are the questions that you ask him. What else can you do to have fun without going out and destroying your body? The education then of what is alcohol going to do to your talent? Can it help your talent? Not for him, more than likely. Now, I know there's the old thing about people drink and then that lowers their inhibition, but we're not talking about some 10 handicap here. We're talking about one of the best players that ever played the game. A person so gifted and natural that who can say how good he could he been a better player? Who can say? But maybe giving this person inspiration to say, look, you can be a better player than you are now by doing X, Y, and Z. What are those things, X, Y, and Z? Well, a little more physical conditioning, maybe. Maybe a little bit more understanding of how alcohol and tobacco can negatively affect a player's performance. But again, we're talking about something that happened back in the 50s and the 60s. Did they have the information about alcohol and tobacco then? It was there, but it was just hidden. But so in today's world, we still see examples of that today, where athletes are slowly destroying themselves because of things that they think is going to happen in the future, which many times it doesn't come to pass. So a mindful athlete does not think in those terms. Yeah, they prepare. Of course they do. But they're not thinking about, well, this is an all or nothing situation here, and I'm just going to party like crazy because I may be dead tomorrow. Well, more than likely they're not going to be dead tomorrow, and you're judging a situation that you're going to die tomorrow. Of course, that's just a figure of speech. What they don't count on is that they may linger on for many decades being in pain and suffering. So then trying to get the athlete away from that kind of mentality then could be a challenge for you. But then if you can turn it in their mind to say, look, there are other things that you can do without having to destroy yourself and build your, if your legacy is something that you care about, is something that you can do to give back to the community, give back to the kids, give back to this, give back to that. And that way that can increase the love of the community to the athlete if that's something that they are interested in. So partying till you're head blows off, that's due to fear. In this athlete's case, it was fear. Could be in your athlete's case as well. They can't face the facts of the future that is unknown. They have a fear of the unknown, something that's going to happen in the future. Well, they don't know what's going to happen in the future. No one knows. And so helping the athlete to come to the grips of this reality with mindfulness and say, look, what do you think about this? What are your thoughts about this? Or what are you thinking about this? Instead of thinking about beating somebody in an elevator, getting drunk on the weekends, smoking this, doing that, taking this, crashing this, why don't we think about, is it a possibility that I can get you to think in these terms? Is it a possibility that you can think in this way? Using more mindfulness and not invasive techniques, telling them what to do, because they may just put up walls of defense before that. Just making them think that, this would be good for me. Yeah. Get my name on the plaque, get my name on a bill. Yes, something like that. Make it good for them. At the very same time, helping them to maintain a level of effectiveness on the field that could be even more prestigious than it is now. Mindfulness then could be the first step in helping them overcome these self-sabotaging behavior. Doing the research, though, would certainly be very effective for this particular athlete. And when you say, look, it's not a given that you're going to die from this particular disease, but with proper exercise, with proper medication, so forth and so on, even if it did happen, you can still be alive. This is not a death sentence. It was for them, but they died many years ago. Now there's more experimental medication for this. There's this, that, and everything else. And so then you're actually giving the athlete a way, then you're giving them an excuse then for hope. And so education and research would then help to hopefully eliminate the fear this athlete may have towards the future. So again, this whole thing is about awareness, helping the athlete become more aware. This is not an all or nothing situation. We're not in war here. And so if we can get to that point, if you can help them at least get to that point where it's not a catastrophe, this is not a disaster looming, there's not this thing in the future that's going to destroy them, that's the first step, making them aware that, look, everything is going to be okay, all right? It doesn't matter. You're doing your best. Here we go. Let's just have a few laughs and go forward. Laugh without being out of your mind, though. Helping people. That hopefully will be their legacy. It seems like most people have that desire, conscientiousness, is that they want to help people. You see it, it's like a common thread among most civilizations. They want to help people. They have this thing of compassion with them, inside them. And so you can tap into that as far as mindfulness to help this athlete overcome self-sabotaging behavior. In that same vein, in that same category, in that example, I'm going to give you a second example of a famous incident that happened several years ago with a professional basketball player. He actually choked his head coach when the coach said something that the player did not agree with. The player actually put his hands around the throat of the head coach, putting him down onto the ground. He sabotaged any success that he could have had and ever was going to have with that team, that's for sure, but also more importantly, he sabotaged any success that he may have had in the future due to the behavior that he exhibited at that particular time. The athlete was emotionally unregulated. That's the first step. Again, we go back into the cues. The athlete was triggered by something the coach said. He didn't like it. And then something had happened over a long period of time, I'm assuming, that built up to this place, bam, and he went forward, sabotaging any success that he was going to have with that team. That's sure, because you can't have a player attacking the head coach, and then have the player say, "Oh well, fellas, I'm sorry, it'll never happen again." No. They've lost the trust in that player, and then subsequently, this player was cut. He wanted to be cut anyway because he didn't like the environment in the team. He certainly didn't like the coach, that's for sure. But, maybe the coach could have used a little bit more tact as well with the player. Maybe the coach is the one that could have used a little bit of mindfulness. Maybe he was one of these old school coaches that yelled and screamed. This player wasn't going to put up with it. He was a superstar player. He didn't need to be yelled at and screamed at. Maybe he just needed to have a little bit more empathy about what he was going through. I don't know all the in detail circumstance, but I am saying, as a consultant, if you're on the team and you get that vibe from that player or a player like that, hopefully you can get to a place of trust between you and the athlete, so the athlete will open up to you and say, "Look, I don't like the way I don't like the way he's talking to me," or so forth and so on. Say, "Well, let's talk about the future. Let's talk about you and where you need to be and where you'd like to be on this team. If it's not on this team, then I will be an advocate for you and help you to get off this team." That's what that athlete needed. And then secondly, helping him understand that if A happens, then do B. If B happens, then do C. Give him a flow chart of control, if possible, to help this athlete stop from sabotaging his own success, because in this particular case, it could have resulted in he not being signed by anybody. They couldn't trust him not to continue with that behavior with another organization. So if we can get him to that place and say, "Look, these are just words, right? This coach really he doesn't understand. It really doesn't. He doesn't know what he's really doing. He's going to be out of here next year anyway, and you can use the press and everything else to help expedite his departure, because you're the one that's important in this organization, not really him." Getting that player to understand, yeah, you know what? It doesn't matter what he says. We get right back to that part. It don't matter. So this would be the second part of mindfulness. Then the third part, obviously, would be the 10-second rule. So then he says something and the athlete's like, "Oh, here we go. Here we go again." Well, then if you made him aware of those types of things, that he's starting to feel it now, maybe his approach then would be to take the 10 seconds and breathe and then just simply walk away. He is practicing mindfulness, but you have given him the control mechanism that he needs in order to get himself out of that situation, as opposed to sabotaging his success by putting his hands literally at the throat of his coach. Well, he didn't. He was traded, and then, of course, his career at that point really didn't do anything after that. So as part of using mindfulness in your practice, it all starts with awareness, making the player absolutely aware of what could happen, and then taking steps, then giving a person mechanisms of control, the puzzle, if you would, to get out of these situations without destroying themselves. That would be self-sabotage, without destroying their own career or their own future. If this happens, do this. If this happens, do this. If this happens, do this. A mechanism of control. That's part of mindfulness. I know that, it's a popular thing to say that within a team environment, team comes first. There's no I in team, so forth and so on. But when you're involved in an organization like this basketball player who was giving it 100%, and he felt in his perception that no one else was, then he can get frustrated. He wants out of that situation. So then, as part of his consultancy, then you can say, "Look, I'm going to raise all of these points up to management, to the coach, and we're going to get you out of this situation one way or the other." You know what? That player then will have more confidence in you. You got an advocate working for him. But then more than that is that you've given him a mechanisms of control. That's really what they want, is a control mechanism to help them cope with the stressors that come with being a high-end athlete. So mindfulness would have helped this individual considerably save his career instead of sabotaging his career. for the future. In conclusion, mindfulness, it really is a perception of life, a state of mind, if you would. It's not going to work for every athlete, but there are certain elements within mindfulness that can help, hopefully, every athlete that you're working with. And so they're not all going to be some zombies walking down the fairway, of course. We don't want that. We want to have the athlete experience joy in their heart and loving their sport and celebrate their success. But what we're trying to do is help them to become emotionally regulated so that when an incident does happen that they don't like, then they're not destroyed, or they're so fearful of the future events that they don't sabotage their career. There have been some other research out there that suggests that players use mindfulness either before a tournament or an activity, or during an activity, or maybe even after activity, with self-reflection. And so it's just something that you can introduce to your client, to your athlete, to see if it works for them, if it can work for them. I can tell you that in my own experience, it has worked terrifically for me by using the words, "That's interesting," when I'm about to get upset. Boy, that's interesting. The language then, it's sort of, because it's such a neutral statement, that's interesting, then I have short-circuited any of the former things that I may have done in the past, getting upset and yelling or something like that, you see, being disappointed. That's interesting. Then you figure it out, and then you move forward. 10 seconds later, that was it. And so the language is critical. The internal language is so critical when you're introducing mindfulness to your client. Yoga is also an activity that is conducive to mindfulness simply because it's trying to quiet the mind. And then also, interestingly, and this is a sort of a fascinating thing, people that smile seem to have a disposition of mindfulness. In other words, when a person is smiling, it seems to send a signal to your subconscious mind that you're happy. And so there could be something there. Some of the research does state that. But as part of mindfulness is that you're in a state of bliss and everything is just fine. And so if a person is in that state, and it's not phony or fake, if it's genuine, just serene, then that player is not susceptible, or won't be as susceptible to situational anxiety as a person who's walking around frowning, head down, just this sort of a thing. And so the mindful athlete is not afraid to engage other people because there's no judgments. They're not being, they really don't care about being judged, because that would be a thing that they would be thinking about what other people are thinking about them. And so they're just happy to be alive. They feel grateful, in other words, just to be in their environment. Now, again, we're talking about a state of mind here, a frame of mind, a perspective. Can you effectively introduce that to a client? The answer is yes, but it's whether or not they can adopt that, it's going to be on them. But at least as a consultant, you can at least introduce it to them and say, look, this got a thing I want you to do some little research on. And then that way, if they agree to go down the old rabbit hole, then they'll start doing their own research on the programs that I had mentioned to you, then you can mention it to them. And if you can get them to that place, then you can hopefully help that athlete turn from an angry athlete full of judgment, bitterness, disappointment, into an athlete that's totally serene, happy, and grateful, and able to showcase to the world their talent, and then spread joy into the world of sport instead of kicking tennis cans and throwing down golf clubs, yelling and screaming. And so mindfulness, again, is a lifestyle, and it can be a challenge for the A personality, hard-charging athlete to adopt. But if they can, then I feel very confident that it can help improve their performance. So I hope you enjoyed this module on mindfulness, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.